Alrighty, welcome everybody to another exciting day of MERN. I know every day of MERN is exciting because either we're hitting our heads against the wall or we're jumping up for joy, and there's never a dull moment. So, as a result, let's go ahead and get into some more of those non-dull moments in just a moment as we hear a word from our sponsors. That's right, we have a little bit of housekeeping to do. I just want to remind you of a few things that we've got going on. About this time of the course, we're about 3 full weeks. Part of our 4th week is coming in. This means we're about halfway towards the exam. And you're sitting here going, we've only done front end stuff. Well, that's okay, because a lot of this has been learning how JavaScript works. Some of the really cool things of ES6, what we need to know. And the nice thing is, these ES6 things, we're going to translate them a bit into the back end. And so there's less of a learning curve there. A lot of the things on the back end are very simplified because they never have to worry about displaying things nice and making things pretty or trying to organize it so it visually looks good. These types of things are all handled by React. React has to worry about all of the user input. It has to worry about keeping track of state. It has to worry about all these different things. And the back end just says, hey, give me a request. I'll go ahead and process it, and I'll give you an answer. You can do whatever you want with it. Our back end is just an API. So as you're thinking about exams and things like that, I want you to keep this in mind. We will not have an exam until after our first lecture of week 7. All right. So with this being week 4, that's going to mean week 7, the earliest we can do it is February 24th. So go ahead and be thinking about that. That'll leave you with about 10 days where you can take 3 different attempts at passing the exam. Our final 3 lectures actually take the front end and the back end and the database, and we merge it all together. Here's our MERN architecture, right? We've been dealing everything here on the front end development. In week 5, we cover back end development and the MongoDB. We cover quite a bit in week 5. But like I said, the learning curve isn't quite as bad because we've already been learning a whole bunch of things that really are important along the way. So we can get through that fairly quickly. And then week 6, we mash it all together. And week 6, both lectures, week 7, first lecture, we build the full stack from the database all the way up through the front end. We cover all the different things that we need to worry about with databases to be able to create, update, read, and delete. And then we also have all the workings in the back end with Express and Mongoose to get that data received, the request received, the response prepared and sent out. It's going to be easier than you think, okay? But in the meantime, just kind of be thinking about it and realizing the best part about the exam is you can use all of your assignment code as reference materials. So as you learn something new about, oh, this is how this works, make a comment in your code or create a separate document or something where you can use as a cheat sheet. Because the best part is you don't have to create your entire project from scratch after you click start the exam. You can look at things and go, you know what? I know I'm going to need a form. So maybe my CSS gets saved and prepped for forms. And maybe I go in and I say, okay, well, I'm going to need a form. Let's go ahead and just kind of start one up so that I know this is the way a text box works, or this is the way a checkbox works. We can do all those things ahead of time so that when I sit down to that exam, I'm not as stressed. So as you go through the assignments, just know, if you get through all the required assignments, you will be more than prepared to do everything that's required to pass that exam. Now, if you want to go above and beyond to get that black belt, then there will be some additional things, and I'll actually be talking about those things so that you guys can pick them up and just kind of be aware of them. And some of them are big and hairy things that you can add in. But the nice thing is the black belt, we give you like 4 to 6 options and say choose 2. The only thing that's guaranteed with a black belt exam is you have to be able to deploy out to Amazon Web Services. So in order to do that, the Amazon Web Services is going to be our, the Amazon Web Services is something that's a part of the platform. And I'm just going to go ahead and see about bringing it up here. Whoops, not that one. Let's see here. Where did I have that one? So wow, I am looking at all the wrong places here. All right, just going to go ahead and bring this up for you here. I want this to just give me some data. And you'll see here that I've kind of been there a few times, and I like to look things up. And so here's my Star Wars API, and I go specifically to a route called people, and I'm looking for one person. Our world of URLs, okay? There is a concept called RESTful routing. Has anyone heard of RESTful routing before? Good deal. So if I go ahead and I look up RESTful routing, there's a lot of things that can give us introductions and things like that. What I'm thinking is, let's go ahead and just find ourselves, okay, Stack Overflow, for example. Stack Overflow is a server that's out there. You guys are all familiar with it. And if I just typed in stackoverflow.com, it's going to show me a page, right? Now, what they've done is they've said, okay, I'm going to kind of narrow this down, almost like a street address for your house or your apartment. You're going to narrow it down and say, okay, what zip code is this? Whoop. What city is this? Smaller. Okay, what is the street name? Smaller. And what is the house address? Boom. Now I'm at one specific place. Well, we do the same thing with URLs. We start by telling the browser, hey, I want to go to this server. But then once I get to that server, it needs to get narrowed down because Stack Overflow has a ton of information. And so they say, okay, if you're looking at questions, we're going to take you to the questions section. Now, inside of that questions section, I have a specific ID that narrows it down further. And then I look at a specific string. So my URL can have numbers and letters and combinations of them and all sorts of stuff. Sometimes you'll even see question marks and equals and this and that and the other. And the truth is, all of those pieces are going to narrow it down to where you get one page that you view. So here with this specific URL, I'm going to come in and I'm going to see what is RESTful routing. Okay. And here they start talking about how you break down the URL. You start with a piece and then you narrow it down and then you narrow it down further. And you'll see that some people use this. Well, here is a RESTful route. RESTful is a representational state transfer. And REST is meaning, okay, this URL is going to give me all the information that I need to give you the specific resource you're asking for. I'm going to show you the exact page you want, and I don't have to know anything about you. I don't have to know that you're coming from another Stack Overflow page. I don't need to know that you're coming from Google. All I need to know is you're asking for this. And my URL represents the thing I'm asking for. And they can transfer that data to me. It used to be for me to build on things, I had to know where you had been in my site before. I needed to know, all these different pieces of information. And in all actuality, the URL could give me everything that I needed. So you'll see different ways of doing things. We've got, if I come back to, come back and look, let's just go ahead and this one looks good. All right, so this little picture right here is telling me the common way of creating URLs to know what we're looking for. You'll see here a get verb, meaning I want to just get some information, is going to say, okay, if I want a list of all the things, I'm just going to say, give me / those things. If I want to find a specific individual thing, I'm going to say, give me those things / and then a specific identifier, like that, like that specific number and label that they had in the Stack Overflow. That would be how I could get just a single thing. Now, if I want to create something new, there are two different ways. I can use either a get or a post inside of my browser. Posting things is the way that we do it. This is a safer way of sending data back and forth, because post kind of packages up your information from your user form and hides it. A get, the way that you can tell you have a get is by this question mark right here inside of my URL. Don't know if you guys can see that, but this question mark up here inside my URL, everything to the right of the question mark is parameters. This is all information that is being sent back and forth with Google in order to show me this exact page. Okay, pretty crazy. I have no clue what most of it stands for, but I can tell you that they have a key called Q, and it has a value of RESTful plus routing. So I'm assuming this is a query string. The and here is saying I have another key value pair, and my key for this one is RLZ, and the value for it is some gobbledygook. So I can, if I was malicious, I can see everything that's being sent back and forth because your URL has it. Post won't let me see that. Post would take all of these things after the question mark and hide it into the body of the request. Now, that's not perfect. You really need secure HTTP to hide things, but this is one way of protecting things using a post. Update, same thing. Put and patch. The interesting thing is you'll notice how post uses the same URL as get. Put uses the same URL as this get, each one being for a specific item. And delete uses the exact same URL as get and put for that specific item. So the way that browsers tell the difference is this HTTP verb. And so when I'm dealing with APIs, I'm going to have to designate a verb. I need to say what I want it to do. And I need to give it a URL that represents what I'm asking for. All right. Now, we'll hit this heavy also on the back end next week. But in the meantime, this is something that we still need to know from our end on the React side, because we need to know how to properly ask for things. And our Star Wars API is a place where we can go to check that out. So let's look at our RESTful URI or URL. Okay. Can somebody give me an idea of what's happening with this URL?
It's looking through a list of people, and there's likely an array that has, a large number, and then the first person in the array is Luke Skywalker.
Very good. That's right. Our API says go and talk to the backend or a backend server to get data. And I want you to go and look specifically for people. And I want you to specifically look for the first person. Okay, so if I hit that one, okay, here we go. This is, they've made it pretty for us. I just want you to tell you that not everybody goes to the trouble of making this look nice. For example, I want to show you this one. This is the Pokemon API. It looked like a whole bunch of garbage, and then all of a sudden my web page changed. The reason it changed is because I have this little extension up here called JSON view. And if I go and I say, let's turn off JSON view and look at it, it says, bleh. All the data's there. I mean, if you look at it, here is an object that shows me a key of abilities with an array, and that array has an object with ability, and that ability key has got an object with a key that's a name, and that one goes to a value of overgrow, and then I have a URL for that ability, and it has a value of this, and that ends the object for my ability. Oh my goodness, this is why I have extensions. So let's try this again. We'll come back here and we'll look at this. It loads in the data, and then my JSON view extension right here, okay, JSON view extension, it goes in and it will create this nice prettied up version of JSON so that I can look at objects and arrays and everything else. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just copy this and throw it into the chat real quick so that if anyone wants this, they can grab it. Okay. All right. And so, not surprising, Will. I figured you probably grabbed it as soon as I mentioned it. So, I don't know about you guys, but I think this is a lot easier to read because this is all the information about a single Pokemon from an API. Somebody made it so that they had all the data together, and I can come in and I can grab any one of these pieces of information and do what I want with it. It just comes back as a JavaScript object to me. So if I look at the Star Wars API, they kind of prettied it up for me, right? They came in and they made this look nice, and they put everything in here. Then the funny thing is the text is white, so I kind of have to highlight it to see all the things that are there. See how it just kind of disappears off my page? Yeah, that was not well thought through. Anyway, I can highlight it and I can see all these different pieces of information. And the nice thing is I can take this information and I can do whatever I want with it. Now, the trick that we have to ask ourselves is when I'm doing things with JavaScript, it starts at the top and it works down through the code. Now, we've recently learned about asynchronous activities. Use state. If any of you guys have tried saying set state and you give it a value, and then immediately after you console log it, it shows you the old value. And the reason being is because it's asynchronous. It says, I'm going to start this process and we'll let you keep going because this may take a while. I'm going to let you keep moving through and interpreting the rest of the JavaScript stuff, and I'll come back when I'm ready. Well, my set state does that. My set state says, yep, I've got the work. I'm going to start on it. You keep going. And they print off the console log before state's even done being set. That is one of the reasons that some of you may run into problems where you're like, well, I set state up here, and then I tried to use state and it has the old version. That would be why. It's asynchronous. It's still working on it. It hasn't updated yet. And the same thing goes with an API. Either we have to halt everything and make it stop, or we need to make it asynchronous. We need to make it so that, okay, we'll go and get that data for you. You go ahead and finish out the function. And as soon as the server gets back to me with the data, I'll do something with it. Well, this creates what's called promises. Okay? Promises, promises, promises. The difference with computers is the promise is something that we can count on. A promise has 3 states. Those 3 states are pending, resolved, and rejected. When I send out my request to this URL, I am now pending. I told the rest of the code, keep moving. I'm waiting on the server to respond. I'm pending a response. Now, there's only 2 different possible responses that I can get. One is resolved, meaning, hey, I got your data, here you go. And you say, thank you, I've been waiting on that. Rejected. Sucks to be you, but I can't give you that stuff. Either you're not authorized or we don't have it because you gave me a bad request. Better luck next time. And so those are the 2 responses. And a promise guarantees you're either going to get a rejection or it's going to be resolved and give you something that's valuable. All right. Now, promises are something that are already built in with our JavaScript. JavaScript, we have the ability to do these types of promises right in our HTML. Okay? And so for me, what I did is I just created a very simple HTML document, and this looks very, very similar to our React code. I created a div with an ID of root, and I put in promises, promises. And now I include a script tag. My script is empty currently, but we can go ahead and fix that. Now, promises, there's different ways of doing promises. And so I'm going to show you, I'm going to just show you this code real quick, and we aren't going to actually use it. We're just going to walk through this real quick. In JavaScript, these are absolutely valid things, okay? I create a const variable called no Mondays, and I create a new promise. Here is a promise constructor. Promise is a class. It's going to create an instance of the promise class, and it takes in 2 parameters, resolve and reject. Now, what happens is this promise is going to basically send back one of those 2 with information in it. It can't resolve and reject at the same time. It's going to only fill in one and return it. So the way this works is if I look at today's date, that's what this new date.getDay is. If it's not equal to 1, then we resolve. We say, hey, you're good to go. It's not a Monday because Sunday is 0 and Tuesday is 2. 1 is a Monday. So it's not 1. So we're good to go. If it turns out to be a Monday, standard if else, right? If it turns out to be a Monday, I'm going to send back a reject object. And that reject object is going to have a message here. Someone has a case of the Mondays. The way that I do this is then I invoke my no Mondays variable. And it's going to go through and do this new promise. When the promise finishes all of its processing, it's going to come back and say then or dot catch. Dot then is for resolve. Dot catch is for reject. Another way of saying this is success or failure. All right. The no Mondays is a promise. Since it's asynchronous, a promise says, I'm going to go and do something. When you come back, when I come back, I will have either a resolve or a reject. And those are looked at by the dot then and dot catch. You cannot enter this dot then until a response has come back. And it has to be a resolve response to go into dot then. If it's a dot reject, then it's going to jump over the dot then and it goes to dot catch. But you cannot enter the dot catch until after the promise is done and we get the reject message. All right. Now, this is kind of all confusing until, oops, I don't want to, oopsie, just kidding. Oh man, you can't tell me I just did that anyway. Well, I'm going to get it back because I want it. Okay, let's go ahead and comment out this code now. All right, because I want to keep it in there so that we can look at it. But what we want is we want something that is going to allow us to go out to our API, get this back, and then put that data somewhere or be able to view it or something like that. And so the way we do that is I'm going to go into using something else that is built into our JavaScript. I'm going to bring up my code again here, and I'm going to use a method called fetch. Fetch is a different type of promise. You'll see here that a promise response is what I get as a result. When I read these helpful tooltips here, the colon in the tooltip after the closing parenthesis, so closing parenthesis colon, that tells me this is the thing it's going to return. This is the name of my method and the beginning of my parameters, because parameters are in parentheses, and I'm going to have an input and an optional. This question mark means optional object. I can tell it different things that I want it to do, but most times fetch is just very simply the URL that I want. And so I'm going to go back to my URL here, and I'm just going to copy it. And I go back to my code, and in my code, I'm going to paste it. Now, the way a promise works is I'm going to go and do this asynchronously, and then I have to catch something, right? I have to do a dot then and a dot catch. I need to be able to know both of them. So the way I do this is I come down, I indent one tab just so that it is easier to read. And you'll notice I do a dot and it tells me, hey, look, there's a catch, which would mean this attaches a callback for only the rejection of the promise. Or I can go to then, attaches a callback for the resolution and or rejection of the promise. So I can do either here, but the then is going to be handling all of our successes. So dot then. Now, you know that it's asking for a callback on this. This is the callback to execute. So if I had created a callback, I could just say, const, here's my callback equals a function. I could do that, or I can just do an anonymous function right here. Now, my anonymous function is going to take in a value. This is the response that's coming from my fetch. And that response is going to be taken as a parameter into my code. Now I can do whatever I want here. I can just do a console.log of response and take a look at it. Now I can't do a fetch without a catch. So dot catch. And catch is another callback. So it needs an anonymous function, and it's going to take in this reject. All right. Now, I prefer to call this one error, just because it makes more sense in my own mind. Totally up to you on how you want to do it, but for me, that's the way I do it. And I can just do a console.log of the error. Nothing fancy. Just going to go ahead and do that. And in my Bob HTML, I'm going to call the script right here. So it'll actually run my script.js. And I'm just going to start this guy up. And so I'm going to open it with live server. This is just an extension that I added. And here I've got my promises. If I open up F12 so that I can look at this, I can see that response that I just printed out is this entire object. It's got headers, it's got the URL that I went to, everything. It has this body, which is a readable stream. Well, that doesn't help me out much. I mean, what's a readable stream? Okay, well, that's because when we look at our code, the raw response that comes back from a web request is actually totally different. And so we need to convert this into something that's usable for us. And the way that I do that is I'm going to take and do another thing with it. I'm going to say my response dot JSON. What this is going to do is this is going to convert that readable stream body from my response object, and I'm just going to convert it into JSON. Now, if I do that, then I need another dot then, because converting things to JSON is asynchronous. Okay, so just like my other dot, then I'm chaining these methods. Just like my other one, I'm going to call this one my JSON response so that I don't get them confused. And here, I'm going to move my console.log down because I know that my response isn't really going to give me anything that I want. And so now, if I've got myself a JSON response, first I go and fetch the data, and that gives me a response. I convert that response into a JSON object. Then I can use that JSON object and see what it looks like. Okay, now we're going through this again. I'm going to do this again, and ooh, it is not happy. What happened here? So let's look and see here.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
How are you running it?
So I've got an extension
Mm-hmm.
called Live Server. It's right here in
Okay.
my VS Code. The Live Server extension here, you can see 9.5 million downloads. It's kind of popular, but it's a way that I can just right click on my HTML file and say open with Live Server. And
And
anytime
in a browser.
anytime I save the file, it goes ahead and updates. It refreshes the browser for me. So yeah, it's just kind of an easy way for me to play around.
So basically, you are running this API on the live server.
Yes. So I'm running the bob.html file, and the bob HTML is running this script.
Oh, I see.
And the
And
script is
this
right here.
script has this. So this API needs to go in a script file inside an HTML.
Yeah, so the way I'm doing it right now, we're going to show you how to do it in React in just a second, though. And that
Sure.
will be a bit easier, but just trying to show you regular JavaScript without any React is fully capable of doing these things. You guys probably did some of this with jQuery and stuff before, but here we're taking this and just going with it.
So
So,
the two quick questions I have, and I don't need an answer now, maybe whenever you go into those topics. One is when we hit to any API, in the response, we can get different type of codes, like for example, 200, 400, and 500, or
yep.
404.
Mhm.
And these responses have a different response object, like for example, if it is 200 there is a object, parsed object, but if it is 404 there can be nothing, right?
That's
No,
right.
no,
Well,
basically. Mhm.
Well, the thing is a 404 error, what you can do is you can respond in your code. You can say, oh, we got a 404 response. Okay, in that case, I want you to take this code path and redirect them back to maybe the index or a login page or something, or you can redirect them over to a web page that says, hey, you came to something that doesn't exist, 404, but I can make a pretty web page that tells them that and say I can respond to those different statuses. And that is a very important part about what we're doing. So that's great.
Sure.
That's a
So,
great one.
so my question was basically, I am having a little hard time. I have seen 200 okay has an parsed object. 404 or 400 sometimes doesn't have anything, or
Mhm.
sometimes when server is down, it is 500.
Yep,
Then that is a basically a different error code. Sometimes the response, sometimes it's nothing. Sometimes it has error, or sometimes it has. it's very difficult to kind of, say if 200, else if 400, else 500, then do this, do this, do this. So
Oh
how
yeah.
basically so if I'm hitting a API, then how to handle different codes is my question.
Well, the key there is what I would do is I would create a component for responding to specific types of error codes. The APIs will actually tell you, you can look at APIs and they'll say, we'll send you back this for success, which is typically 200. And we'll send you this one for not authorized. And we'll send you this one. And they'll give you a list of them. And what you'll do is in that component that you export, you could have just a function that says, okay, if you run into this, do this. If you run into this, do that. And what I would do is I'd say, okay, if it's anything other than success, go and use that special function so that I can keep all of that error code stuff in one place and I don't have to paste it in to each one of my pages. And so that would be the way I'd do that. Just so that you know, there are groups of 100 numbers for all 5 different types of statuses. It's crazy. We know about 404 because we hate finding pages that don't exist. And we know about 200 because that's always a success. But we could use these actually to control things. We could say, hey, this was a success, but I called it 215 because it was special. And these all are examples. These are kind of the common things. Tells the user agent to reset the document which sent this request. I've never used that one, but it's a possible thing to be in there, right? And so when I'm playing with these things, it's important to just kind of know that I can go and look up the different responses, the statuses that come back. Even our Star Wars API, when we look at it, you'll notice that it says HTTP 200 OK. That means it was a 200 status code. It was OK. And it'll include a lot of information, but it really depends on the API you're talking to, determines what comes back. Is it just a status code? Is it a status code in a message? Is it status code in an object? It really just depends on the API. And then you as the developer have to code around it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
And the other question I had was asynchronous means parallelly multiple threads going in and not waiting for one job to get complete and then start the other job.
That is technically correct. If you look at the specs for JavaScript, they say that it is not capable of multi-threading. What they've done is they've just kind of done a magic trick to simulate it. And that's where the promise is coming. But yes, in a sense, it's waiting for it's waiting for that one thing to get done, and it allows other things to happen while waiting for it.
Okay, got it. So it's
So
waiting and it will hold the result in the callback, but at the same time, it is letting other tasks getting done too.
that's correct. So the way that it works is basically if you were in a function, whoops, I need to get my drawing tool back here. If we were inside of a function and there was a promise that happened up here, and there's a whole bunch of lines of code, when this guy goes off, he says, I'm waiting. And it allows these other guys to go through. And at some point in time, this guy says, okay, I'm back. And it just kind of loops back up and says, okay, your turn. All right, we can continue on.
Got it. Thanks.
So That's what the asynchronous means. Great question. That is one that it takes a little while to kind of wrap our brains around it. But I will tell you, if you're dealing with really strange results, you're not getting what you expected, you put a console log right after something and it's not showing you what you expect, start wondering, is this an asynchronous call? Because if it is, it could be the cause of our problem. So, awesome, awesome, awesome. Okay, so now I realized part of the reason that I have a problem here is I put my .then in the wrong place. I have to have JSON, converting things to JSON is actually an asynchronous event. And so I need to come and put my .then with my asynchronous call. Now, the interesting thing about that is if I have a .then, I need a .catch as well. And I can call this one JSON error because this catch matches with this initial call. All right. So my JSON error is going to be, let's get my cursor back here. My JSON error is going to be another anonymous function. And I'm just going to say console.log JSON error. All right. So now my bet is that this is going to work. Let's get back to our, whoopsie, overshot my window. There we go. I should be back to the, is this one it? All right, there we go. Now my object looks like this. So what we did is we went and we did an asynchronous call to fetch. Once it returns, it said we were successful and we come into the .then. We use the response that we got the data back from our fetch and we say, oh, we need to convert this to JSON. He runs off asynchronously and does this work. The success comes back and goes to the .then. Using the response from our JSON conversion, we can then set it in here and console log it, and that is what we're seeing. Anytime I do this asynchronous promise, I need to make sure that I have a .then and a .catch. All right? All right, perfect. So now this looks like a lot of code, but it's doing what we want. It goes out and grabs this and can put it here. Now, you know, one thing that I know that I can do is I could come in here and I could do another JavaScript thing. Document dot get element by ID, and I can tell it to go look for the root element, and then I can do a .inner HTML. So this is what React does, right? It goes and gets the root element, and then it sets the inner HTML to what we want. And so let's say that we want it to be our JSON response. So I'm going to just go ahead and I'm going to use what's called string interpolation. This is using backticks, not single quotes, backticks. It's above the tab on my keyboard. And this allows me to use variables, JavaScript variables inside of this. So I'm going to create a div, or actually, yeah, I'm going to create a div. And inside of this div, I'm going to put in my variable called JSON response. And the reason I'm doing this is just so that the browser doesn't try to do funky things with my object. With that saved, I should be able to go into my my browser and see I've got this object. Darn it. It doesn't want to print out my object. So let's look at our JSON object real quick. Over here in my API, I know that if I can get this object, that I'm going to see all of this information. Well, let's look at this one instead. This is my JSON object that I console logged out. And so if I said .name, that should say Luke Skywalker. Insert .name into this. So my JSON response .name should give me the name right here in my object, Luke Skywalker. So I save this guy and come back. Boom, there's Luke Skywalker. I converted this JSON object to here. Bob, what about .all? Well, let's go ahead and see. JSON response .all. Oops. Undefined. We don't have a key in here .all. And so unfortunately, that's not going to find something to match it. But if with the .name, I'm able to get Luke Skywalker out of it. All right, well, with this all in place and understanding promises using fetch, I bet we could go and do something with our React code. Okay. So wouldn't I need the key value pairs? What do you mean by that, Josh? Just want to clarify. Is this a precursor to web scraping or something else? That's a great question too. So let's look at Josh. Josh, what did you? If you wanted to display all, would need key value pairs. Okay, so in order to display all the things, I would refer to JSON response, and then I'd have to give it the dot followed by the key to show every single value that's in there. In order to get in here and display an entire object, the easiest way to look at an entire object is by console logging, looking in those developer tools. If you want it to display on the screen, you typically will type out all of those pieces, and you can use for loops inside of the object to print out both the key and the value pairs. So that is something that can be done with a for loop, but we won't be covering that one today. It's a good question. Awesome. Okay. So
I have a question also.
Yes, please.
Is there a reasonable limit of, say, number of lines of JSON data that you would want to bring in at once? The reason I ask is I'm using code that's pretty close to what you have to grab JSON data from a file I have locally, but is 4,000 lines of data. And I can pretty much choke Chrome.
Yes, you can.
It'll take 7 seconds to load that data or that page, and so I've been trying to figure out, well, what's a reasonable limit? I cut it down to 500 lines, and figured I could bring in 500 lines first, and then bring in another 500 lines, maybe paginate or something. I don't know.
That's exactly it. And on an API, typically, if you try to request too much data, they by default will paginate it. So if I come here and look at my Pokemon API, if I eliminate this one, my RESTful API says that means go and get all of the Pokemon.
Oh,
And
okay.
if I do that, here's my count of 1,118 Pokemon. And I can collapse each one of these because of my extension.
Yep.
And I can just keep going and going and going. Wait, no, I can't. What is this? Oh, look. It went ahead and it gave me only 20 and it
Aha.
gave me pagination. It's like, hey, you know, let's just say you get the first 20 because you didn't give us a limit. And you can click on this next link to show the next 20. And we're going to limit you to 20. Well, I could say, okay, well, limit me to 200. And there's my 200.
Ay,
Okay.
ay, ay.
What if I said I limit myself to 1,000? Now I wait. Did you see how much longer that took?
Yeah, yeah. Try 4,000.
There aren't
Well,
that many Pokemon yet.
unfortunately, there's only 1,118 Pokemon.
Oh, okay, I see
So,
that.
but I can say an offset of 0 and leave off the limit. That still limits me to 20. Never mind. They decided to do it on their own. Okay, so if I go offset of 0 and limit it to 2,000, I bet you that'll give me all of them. There's all of them. I can scroll
Nice.
past all of them down to the bottom.
Cool.
That's just crazy. But the more I get, the slower it responds. So although the limit may be higher than we want to ask for, right? Because people want their pages to be fast and they don't want to wait. And so it's easier and better for us to say, well, you know, I'm going to chunk this out, paginate it, and make it so that it's fast, but it gives you a few more. All right.
Cool,
So,
thank you.
absolutely. All right. So let's go ahead and look at our code and just see what we can do. I've got a project here and I just created a brand new project, and all I did was I cleared out all this stuff so that we're kind of back to normal, right? This is where we typically would start. And I'm going to go into my folder, do an npm start, and this will just take a second. But you'll notice here I've got the typical app CSS, but I've imported already this use state and React because I want to be able to use state to keep track of some things as I'm going along here. And so let's go ahead and let this guy finish loading up. Close out a few of these things, my extensions and the Pokemon API, the RESTful routing. There we go. We're getting down just a little bit. So here's my using APIs, right? Just what we would expect. Now, as I go through and I request information from an API and I want to display it on my page, the best way to do this is using state, because my function will go out and request it, but then it's going to move on and it's going to display my page. I need something to say, okay, I got the response back. Let's re-render this page. And the easiest way to trigger that is by using state. So let's create some state. Const. Can somebody walk me through creating some state for, say, a person?
So const,
Person, that's person. Sorry, go ahead, Dwena.
no, that's fine. Please go ahead.
It'll be brackets, person, with set person is equal to a use state with an empty string, or would you, well, we'll start from there.
Okay, well, we get use state. Now, what type of data do we anticipate this getting back from that fetch?
JSON?
We'd probably want an object, right? A JSON object. Perfect. Okay, so this goes ahead and sets up my state, right? And so in here, I'm going to want to be able to display something about that state. And we know that that person object is going to have the person object is going to have a name in it. So person.name, that gives us the ability to see just the piece that we want. Now we also need to have some sort of a function, right? So I'm going to say, let's see here, get person is the name of my function. And I'm going to say, this is going to be an anonymous function because I want to be able to call this when I want it. And it shouldn't have to take anything extra into it. Now here's where we're going to have just a little bit of fun because we've already coded this all up. I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to copy all that work that we just did and paste it right here. All right. Now I'm going to go ahead and indent this guy just so that it looks nice. It all belongs here. But now, instead of doing this document.getElement by ID, let's try setting our state. Set person to the JSON response. All right. So now we've got this. We're going to go out and fetch, which is a promise. If we're successful, then we'll take that response and we're going to convert it using another asynchronous method called converting to JSON. And if it's successful, then I'm going to take that JSON response. I'll still console log it, but then I'm going to set person to that JSON response. Now, if this set person runs, it's going to change my state, which is going to change this value here in the div. Sounding reasonable? I'm just connecting dots, right? And so let's see here. Line 7. Oh, my get person is never called. Well, I should probably do something about that. Let's just create a button that says on click. And my on click is going to get person. Got to spell it right, because that's gonna say, okay, we'll go and run that function, and we'll just say get Star Wars character. I'm just making this up as I go along as far as names and stuff. So, you know, if you guys have a better way you'd like to do it, we can do that too. But here I've got my using APIs header. I've got the button I created. And if I come and look in my developer tools, my console, it's like, hey, nothing showing yet. Components, my app, state is still an empty object. So I say, okay, get Star Wars character. Boom. My state is now set up with that entire object that I had, I just munged that one. Let's try this again. I'm going to refresh this guy, go back in, dragging and dropping. It's a nifty thing unless you didn't mean to. Anyway, So here I've got my useState hook that has this entire object saved in it. And we told it to just print off that name. In the console, we told it to print the entire JSON object. So I have the entire JSON object here as well. Okay. Now, all I did was I took that standard JavaScript stuff and threw it in right here. Nothing fancy. I just turned it into what I wanted, right? Well, let's think a little bit more about this. All right. So now, most pages that I go to don't require me to click on a button to show data, right? So we got to ask ourselves, you know, the ability, you'll notice there's a comma here for a second parameter. We start with a callback, and then we can add in what's called a dependency list. Now, this is the thing that gets me in trouble a lot. Just want to tell you right up front, I get myself in trouble a lot because of this dependency list thing. It comes after the code of the callback function. And what it says is, if this piece of state changes, I want you to rerun this code. Otherwise, don't mess with it. You ran once, don't mess with it. So the way this works, useEffect is going to have a function. That function is going to take in parameters, which normally is nothing, but we could take in something from props or something like that if we wanted. It's going to be an anonymous function, and I'm going to move all of this code here up into useEffect. I'm going to get rid of this closing curly that went with getPerson. And inside of here, I have to remember that there is a comma right here on line 25. If I leave this out, it will do screwy things that make absolutely no sense. You will troubleshoot it for a long time. You will beat your head against your computer keyboard, and eventually you're going to remember that we need a comma with square brackets at the end. The square brackets is my dependency list, meaning I don't depend on anything. If I want this function to run again, I can put something, a state variable, inside of these square brackets. It's just an array. But an empty array says run once and be done. I'm hoping I'm drilling this one in solid enough, because useEffect is going to be used all over in our code as we're dealing with APIs. And it's because when I come to a page, I don't want to have to click on a button to make it happen. I want it to just show up with my data. And I do that here. useEffect runs once. It's going to run all of the code inside of these curly brackets one time. And if I need it to be dependent on something, meaning I changed something over here, I need to refactor and redo whatever, I can do that here. But in all the stuff we're dealing with, almost everything we do will never have anything in that. And I can just run whatever code I want, just like normal. And in here, we're still just setting the person in state and going with it. But now I should expect to see this person name show up as soon as the fetch returns and assigns it into my set person state. You guys have questions about that?
I have one, but not about the effects, but little I am behind. So for this setting up the state, the second variable has to start with set. I have seen it's always starts with set, but I somehow feel it can be anything, right? Instead of set person, we can have just person or person one or anything, right?
Yes, you can. But the reason the naming convention starts with set that you'll see out on the web and everything is because these two pieces
Are
work
tied
together.
together. Yes,
Mhm.
I mean, I have that understanding. It is tied
Mhm.
together. It's basically setting the things up for that person. It is setting the state for that person, and person is the initial state.
Person is the initial state, but it's also the value. So some people like to do this. They say get person versus set person, because this one will go and get the value out of state that person represents.
Right.
But the common naming convention is you just say person so that people can know this will print out or give you the value. Set person is the only way to change it. If you
Yes.
said person equals, it'll give you an error.
Right. So,
Mhm.
so basically, to work with the states, we have to first set it up and then use it.
Yep, exactly. And what's in between these parentheses is the initial value to person.
Yes. Got it.
Yep,
Thanks.
perfect. All right. So any questions? We feeling okay with this so far? Go ahead.
Could you please scroll down past line 30 just for the use effect implementation there? Okay, yeah, just back that. Okay, simple enough.
Yep. All I did was comment out the on-click button. So,
Fantastic.
all right, let's go see what happens. All right. All right.
Yes.
So if I do a refresh, did you notice the delay there? It shows using APIs, and then Luke Skywalker eventually shows up. I'm hoping Zoom can show you that.
Yeah.
And so it's because of those asynchronous calls. We start with the nothing inside of our person object. And after the call and after the conversion to JSON and after the setting to state, all of a sudden, boom, it's there. So this is getting pretty cool. I can come in and use this API and I can get this data, but I can display the pieces that I want. Okay, let's get a little crazy. What happens if I come into my API here and I say, I want the people instead of just one, I want all the people. Okay. Ooh, it let me do it. Count 82. Results, the key results, notice the square bracket. The square bracket is showing us this is going to be an array. And then I go immediately to a curly bracket, meaning this is an array of objects. And I come down to the closing curly and the comma. That's the end of the first object. And then I come to the second object, which is C3PO. And the third object is R2D2. Now, do you guys remember us using map last time? We used a nifty thing called map to go through an array of objects. So let's change this. I'm going to now have a people. Let's do people here. People. And we're going to set people. And I'm going to change this. Instead of just being a single object, I'm going to make it an array that holds all the people. Now, I know how to get things out of my state. And so I'm going to come in here. I'm going to actually, just to show you guys for fun, I'm going to copy this. And my second useEffect is just going to remove the number 1. I'm going to get all the people this time. And this time, I'm going to set, instead of person, I'm going to set people. So my JSON response should be able to give me all of the people, right? And then with that, I'm going to say, let's go look at that object. It's gonna set it in the console and then set it in my state for me. So let's come back to our page. Here, I'm going to clear this out and refresh the page. All right. So I got the person just like we did before. But now I've got the response from people, and this one is an entire object with results showing me 10 people. So there's a total of 82 people in this API that I can talk about. And if I want to do the pagination, I can look at page 2 with the next. There's kind of a pattern that they create with APIs, if you've noticed, where they encode all these things. But the thing we want is this results array. So in all actuality, I need to go back to my code and I need to say, I want this set people to be my response dot results. Results is my array. So results. So if I save that, that should make it so that my state, or what's going to be available, is an array. Here's my array of objects. Now, an array, I can use .map to go through each and every single one of them. And so let's do this. I'm just going to create a horizontal rule. Don't know if you've seen that one before. It's just a line across the screen that kind of separates things. And I'm going to use some JavaScript. And I'm going to look at my people array and use .map. And my map is going to use a callback function. So I need to bring in each individual value, which will be a person object. And I'm going to create this index so that I can avoid the errors that I see in Chrome when it's complaining about, I can't see these things. Now, here's the goofy thing about map. Remember, parentheses, not curlies here. Okay. Parentheses, I can create now a JSX element. And I can put in here whatever I would like. But the first thing my element has to have is key equals my index to make sure that React knows, hey, this one belongs to that element in the people array. Now, inside of this div, I could create different things. So let's do a P, and we'll say name is person object dot name. What other things can I know about a person? I could have their birth year. I could have their mass, their home world. Let's go ahead and go for home world. That sounds kind of cool. So I'm going to create another p tag. And I'm going to say home world. And the home world is found with .home world, all lowercase. So person object .home world is the data that I'm going to show there. And I'm going to go through every single person in this people array, and I'm going to create a new div that shows their name and their home world. And maybe I could take this horizontal line and I could put that at the top of this so that it makes it look just a little bit separated. All right, getting kind of crazy, I know it, but let's go look and see what it looks like. You ready for this? Drum roll. Oh, he shoots, he scores. Thank you, thank you. I'd like to thank my family and my friends for putting up with my strangeness and my class for actually clapping. We hit the API. It gave me back a whole bunch of JSON, just raw data. And I turned around and put it into a more usable format. Now, can you start to imagine things like Facebook, where they have just tons and tons of things showing? They all look the same, and they only show you the first amount. And as you scroll down to the bottom, all of a sudden it, same thing with Twitter, same thing with Instagram, you name it. They give you a portion of the data. And when you get down to the bottom, it makes another API request. And that API sends back more of this raw data. And the front end says, I know how to make that look pretty. Let me add to state these things and make it look like this. Okay. So now we've got a couple of questions here. Is there a way to cut down the timing of an asynchronous call? Unfortunately, not really. It's a function of the path that your request takes to your server, how busy your server is, and how much data it has to transfer back to your client. So the best way to reduce that round trip is, if you're expecting them to look at small amounts of data, send back small amounts. There are other ways of doing it, in the fact that you can do what's called batching, where I'm going to send you 10 back right now. And then in the background, and this is kind of an advanced topic, in the background, as it displays these things, it makes another request for things that are down below the bottom of the screen. And so it's prefetching, as they call it, the next batch of data to show. And it can do that. You can code it to do whatever you would like for as long as you like. And so in that case, that is a way of doing it. Okay. So if we wanted to, we could get the names of all the home worlds. Now, if we look at this object, right, I can see all sorts of information. I can look at starships. I can look at vehicles. I can look at films where Luke Skywalker was in the film or using the vehicle or in that starship. And using this information, I could do another fetch. I could say, well, go and get the name of this starship. And I want you to show me that data. I mean, there's a lot of things that we can do. It's just a matter of time and code. I always tell people, yes, that is possible. It's just a matter of time and code. Well, it would look so cool if you did this. I'm like, yes, it would. It's just a matter of time and code. And they get kind of tired of that. But the truth is, it's just a matter of time and code. So if I want to do something fancy, I can code up as fancy as I want, and I could make it do, 15 fetches and get back data and all sorts of crazy stuff. Now, different APIs, they will go in and they'll say, hey, these things normally go together. So we'll give them a special URL that gives them that combined information. The only way to know about that is either you create the API or somebody documents it and says, hey, if you're using our API, come and look at what you can do. And that's what they did here. For the Star Wars API, they came and they gave us this quick example right here. Need a hint? Try these things and we'll show you. Well, that's cool, right? But then you have to ask yourself, well, how do I get more information? And right here on the page is this thing. Consult our documentation if you'd like to get started. Every API that's publicly available is right. They're going to have something like this. And they have introduction, getting started, base URL, rate limiting, authenticating, JSON schema, searching, encodings. You can even use a Wookiee encoding. That is correct. You can ask for things in a format known as Wookiee. I haven't tried it, but it sounds like fun. I can come in and I can look at these different endpoints. Well, these are different parts along the way in that URL. I can look specifically at starships, or I can look at films, or I can look at vehicles, species, planets, people. I can look at all sorts of cool things. And if you want to, here is a whole bunch of helper libraries that have been created by other people in order to utilize this. And in these helper libraries, they combine things like grabbing the person and combining all of the starships, all of the data about the starships into a single JSON object. Now that could take multiple fetches, but they created a library to do those things for you. And all you have to do is say, well, let's go look at that. And here's your JavaScript library. You got the SW API for Node. I could use my Node server as a request for the API. I wonder. Create your own custom stuff, guys. It's only a matter of time and code, right? And then the SW API wrapper. So we can see here in the documentation, it's going to show me how to do things. You can open up a terminal and you can use curl, which is an application, to go and make an HTTP request to this, and it'll show you what comes back when we do a fetch. This is the response you get. Okay, well, if I go ahead and manually convert things to JSON, I can do that. Sweet. Base URL, everything is here. You just got to be willing to read. And the documentation is going to give you a lot of things. But you have to read in order to understand, how do I do this? How do I do that? How do I get 400 instead of 20? How do I get, how do I start at, person number 37 and get the next 5? Well, it's in the documentation. So I've given you the tools to get in there and start using things. One of the things that I've done here is I've jumped a little bit in my lessons to give you this use effect. I know that assignments are due by Wednesday. The due dates, take them with a grain of salt, guys, because oftentimes I'm covering the material like a day late or something like that, and I want to make sure that we get through routing and stuff next time. So I threw useEffect in here. Hopefully that'll help you, because useEffect runs as soon as the page loads. And if you need it to, you can use this dependency list, but we won't be using that very often or much at all if we do. But it's a great way to fill our state, and then state can refresh. It can re-render our JSX to show those new values. Does anyone have any questions before we stop?
When you first did the hang on, what's it called? The effect, the use effect. When you first set that up, what was the, and you just were fetching that, like just fetching person in slot 1. It was, the last line was parenthesis, comma, curly bracket, and that's it, right? Just for that one?
Well, we still have to do in useEffect.
Mm-hmm.
If you can see, I don't know how well it shows, but
Yeah,
when I hit it, it shows this blue line down to here. This is the closing curly bracket for that anonymous function. And then I have a comma to go to a second parameter.
Oh, shoot, my bad. There it is. Okay, I had a, oh, it's a curly, yeah, sorry. I thought I had a parenthesis, not a curly bracket. Ah, okay. Oh, and that's the other thing. Okay. Thank you.
So, yep, curly bracket, comma, square brackets, and then you close out the useEffect method with the closing parenthesis. It gets crazy with all these brackets and parentheses, but if you get them straight, they're awesome. If you get them wrong, you'll get used to those errors. I'm sorry, you will get used to them. You'll get to where you recognize them. But this particular one, that comma square brackets, it's squirrely. It can give all sorts of strange errors and strange responses. And so just for me, the way that I usually start these things out, I go useEffect, and then I do this, and I start my parentheses, and I do my anonymous function, and I immediately come down here, and I do my comma with the square brackets. Because if I don't do it that way, if I don't do it like in my pattern, I'm hosed. I'll get something squirrely, and I'll be looking at it going, why is this not working? And then I go, oh, I forgot the square brackets again in useEffect. So just as I'm typing it out, I just do this. I always throw in my comma square brackets before I write any code inside of my useEffect. Does that make sense? It's just a pattern. It doesn't have to happen, but it saves me so much headache when I do it right. All right, any other questions for tonight?
Where do we specify the headers? Because this is a public API. If we have an API which is kind of protected by some headers, where are we going to put those?
Well, the headers, we can control the headers up here in the fetch the way that we set them to be. Those are all options that we can add in there, but we're going to start looking at things a little bit different than fetch here shortly.
You don't even.
Okay.
Well, you kind of do.
And then to receive, since we're creating the API, on the receiving end, we're gonna use the Express library to help us work with headers. So that'll be on the.
Boom.
Travis is having fun.
Oh, got it to work.
Awesome.
God, so dumb.
I know that feeling. So does that answer your question, Rita?
Yeah, sure. We'll
Okay.
look when we get to the Express.
Very cool, because that's
There we go.
on our API side, we'll use Express and we can actually look specifically at the headers. That's where you would put in like a JavaScript web token, your cache, there's a lot of things that can go into that header that we will receive on the API end, as well as we can control it on this sending end, the React side. We can control what we're sending out as well. And so we'll actually be using another library called Axios to simplify that for us. All right. Okay, any other questions?
Can you scroll down?
Yeah. Where to? Just the
Okay.
use effect there?
To the, oh, wait a minute. A little bit further.
Okay. So I'm going to go
Okay.
ahead and stop the recording here so that we don't get a whole
Okay.
bunch of dead space at the end. But